Welcome back to Making the Case. Joel Castón is the first incarcerated person to hold public office in Washington, D.C., and he was kind enough to grant me an exclusive TV interview from the D.C. jail where he's currently being held. Joel, who was elected as an advisory neighborhood commissioner, has spent almost 3 decades in prison. He was convicted of murder at the age of 18, and the story of his life over the last 27 years behind bars is nothing short of remarkable. Tonight, we're airing my full interview with the man himself, Commissioner Castón. Now, you may be wondering how a person behind bars could be elected to public office. Well, it turns out in D.C. there isn't a specific ban or prohibition, but the mechanics of an incarcerated person getting elected are more complicated. The district where the D.C. jail is located hasn't had a representative since 2013 when it was first created. And that's because the district was made up of a jail and a women's homeless shelter. Incarcerated people couldn't vote, and shelter residents were, by definition, transient. All that changed last July was when D.C. joined states like Maine and Vermont in passing a bill allowing incarcerated people and people with felony convictions to vote. Suddenly, there were constituents in the district who could elect a representative, and that's how Joel's journey to public office started. An interesting footnote, there's now a luxury apartment building located in Joel's district. So not only will he be representing those who are incarcerated within the jail and those staying at the shelter, he'll also be representing those residents living in that new high-rise. When I met Joel, I wanted to understand his journey, starting with where he came from. Who was that young 18-year-old who was convicted of murder? What was he like? To the 44-year-old who just made history and now holds an elected office.
I would say humble. There's no way I can be in this position. I had to give a strong shout out to all the returning citizens who have pounded pavement. These individuals have made our voices heard. They're doing remarkable jobs in the society, which convinced the council members here, DC council members, to pass this progressive law that allowed incarcerated residents to be able to vote in the first place and to run for public office. So I feel humble. I feel humble, and I would say this: I may be the first, but I will not be the last.
Look at you, talking like a politician already. All right, so before we get into your remarkable campaign and your future, I'd like to briefly talk about your past. You've been incarcerated for 26 years, since you were 18. Why were you incarcerated?
I was incarcerated for a murder, a case that happened when I was 18 years of age. And since that time, with my incarceration, as you had just already referenced, for 27 calendar years now. I turned 45 on the 13th of July this month here. And so from 18 to 45, which is a large span of time, is just I would say, just coming outside of that dark space, if you will. There's no way you can survive the amount of time I've been incarcerated if you don't rely on God. So I'm the first to admit that my faith is what anchored me. And so my queen, which I call my mom, she was the person that told me to turn to God. And I turned to God, and God began to revive my spirit. And so now, not only am I using the term returning citizen, as my pastor teaching me, I'm a redemptive citizen.
So tell me, who was Joel Castón at 18 years old? What was he like?
He was no different from most of the young guys that come from inner city communities, unfortunately. We understand that the root of all of mass incarceration is poverty, joblessness, poor education, all these things which created the monster we call mass incarceration, but also predates that when we go back to slavery, convict leasing, and Jim Crowism, and redlining, all these things, all these dynamics, and we don't really want to throw in the mix the war on drugs and what the crack epidemic did into our community. So growing up as a young man inside of Washington, D.C., which is the political capital of the world, I was always aware of politics, right? Even when I was a kid, I talk about this in my memoir. I ran for public to be a student council member. That is what it is. To be a student councilman when I was a kid. And so just wanted to be involved. And so that young person who I like to say I was a clueless teen. Now I'm a commissioner, right? And so just coming from being a clueless teen who did not know his full.
Mr. Commissioner, if you don't mind me calling you Joel, right?
Yeah,
you earned that title, but I definitely want this to be more of an informal interview. So I'm gonna call you Joel. So you are now 44, about to be 45. If you had the opportunity to talk to your 18-year-old self, if you could give yourself at 18 any piece of advice, what would that be?
Don't be afraid to strive. Don't be afraid to be the best version that you can possibly be. oftentimes I think that in my personal story, as well as many members that come from my community, our narrative was shaped by our surroundings. And so I remember one time my family asked me, I actually went to a school that's outside of my district. And that school was the first time I was experiencing something that was other than what I formerly knew. That is, say, drugs and violence and things of that nature. And I ran away from that. I ran away from it. I didn't even want to be a part of it because I felt like it was not me. Now, here I am, and all I want to be is in that type of stuff, right? And so not only do I want to be in that type of stuff, I want to go back to the young people that come from where I come from and let them say that you may have started here, you may have you may have begun here, but you don't have to end there.
Now, before we get into your actual campaign run, tell me about some of the things that you've done while you've been incarcerated.
Yeah, since I've been incarcerated, I can say that outside of I actually had a spiritual awakening. The next thing I did was I began to pursue higher education, encouraged by an older gentleman who was my mentor, who encouraged me to get my GED. And once I got my GED, the light bulb went off. It was like, oh my goodness. First, I didn't think I was gonna get it. Then once I got it, I'm like this, wow, such a new world of possibilities open up. And so the first thing I wanted to do was that my god brother, he encouraged me to say, hey, if you want to take college classes, I'll pay for it. And so I began to look into what I want to do as far as college classes, and that led me down the track of finance. And I got into finance, but I didn't know finance is such a broad field. Business is a broad field. In fact, I just looked at business first. Then I went from business to finance. And once I got into finance, because I had a small nest egg saved up, and a lot of banks were asking my mom about what do you want to do with this money here. My mom, like, hey, you got this money, what you want to do with it? I said, Mom, give me a second, right? Let me figure this out. And the stock market was booming at that time. And I got into the stock market. I remember Tavis Smiley. He had a little show on BET, demystifying the stock market. To watch the PBS station, they talk about the Wall Street week with the late Louis Rukeyser. And I got into that, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the numbers. I fell in love with the fact that there were not enough people of color on that show. And for some reason, that inspired me. I said, you know what? I want to learn this. And I started reading devouring every book that centered around finance. And like I said, I had a little money. I didn't have a lot, but I had a little money. And so I would try to encourage my child's mom at the time to do some investing for me. And she said, you sound like you're talking Chinese. And so I had to break it down for her, right?
Yeah.
And in the process of me breaking it down, I started writing, and I shared my writings with my peers. My peers like, who wrote that? And I wrote that. Like, you wrote that? Man. And that's when I realized I had a solid grasp on understanding the markets. And that's what took me to where I'm at now, because I just became a financial geek. And I like saying that because I'm a geek. That's basically what it is. I'm a financial geek. I'm a self-published author. I wrote my book, Currency Catchers, that's available on Amazon. And I walk my readers in how to understand the markets, the beginner's version. And I want to eliminate intergenerational poverty caused by the absence of asset ownership for people from disinvested communities.
Listen, you are light years ahead, because I mean, that's what we're just now getting into, and financial literacy for our community is so important. All right, so to your campaign, as a criminal defense attorney, I've represented people behind bars, and it isn't the kind of environment where hope lives, right? Instead, for the most part, it's where hope dies. Tell me what motivated you to run.
That's the way you framed that question right there. You said it's not a place where hope lives, it's where hope dies. That is the truth. When I was sentenced to life of imprisonment at the age of 18, hope was snuffed out of me. There was no hope. Again, if it wasn't for my queen that told me to turn to God, I would have no hope right now. Mm-hmm. So in the process of me pursuing my faith in God, I realized that what we're doing currently here where I'm housed at, the DC, shout out to DC. DC got the game right. The director here, he has a progressive mindset. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to make these conflict spaces more equitable, more fair, especially for young people. Mm-hmm. Young people don't have a clue from right to left, right? And so hope for me, hope was my faith. And then as I said, once I had my faith, education is clear. And then that became my new makeup. I check in here, we have a check-in in the Wyoming community where we give rate our scales, our feeling from 1 to 10. And I intentionally rate them every day at $7.5 billion. I do that intention. I want to raise the way we think.
Yes.
So I check in at $7.5 billion, irregardless of what's going on in my life. It doesn't matter, because mine is over matter. And so I do that to change the narrative and inject that type of sense of hope inside of my young people that I am mentoring inside the program. And so that's what took me out of my dark space. And once I grabbed on education, I didn't let it go.
So how was Joel able to run a successful campaign behind bars? Well, here's a clip from that part of the interview.
I realized that writing takes your voice outside of your immediate space. And so a lot of the articles I wrote allow others to know who Joel Castón is. We have one narrative, but as represented by constituents, we do not want to be defined by a single narrative.
We continue that conversation and more after the break. You're watching Making the Case. It's one thing to be eligible to run for public office, to be able to vote, but it's a whole other thing to run a campaign from behind bars. Remember, this had never been done before, so the logistics were, to say the least, challenging. In the end, though, 5 people ran and Joel won 30% of the vote.
So tell us how you ran a campaign from inside of a jail cell.
I've been fortunate from a lot of my networks to be able to do a lot of writing. And so I realized that writing takes your voice outside of your immediate space. And so a lot of the articles I wrote allow others to know who Joel Castón is. We have one narrative, but as represented by constituents, we do not want to be defined by a single narrative. And so my narrative supersedes what led me to prison. And so that allowed me to gain or to meet other individuals who were invigorated and inspired by my story. To God be the glory, I would say that there. And then from that point on, I was doing a podcast with my colleagues here. And during the podcast, we were investigating the program, how we can be effective in the podcast. And I discovered that not only can we run for office, not only can we vote, but we can also run for office.
Yes.
I cast my name in the ballot. I cast my name in the ballot. I won. It was a hiccup. I was disqualified for technicality around my address, and I was not despondent, even though I thought that it was a missed opportunity, because I feel as though my job is just to be a trailblazer. I'm a trailblazer. As I stated earlier, I'm the first, but I will not be the last. And so I ran again, and I was very inspired by the fact that not only were I running, there were other individuals who wanted to run.
Yes.
That's what it looks like, democracy in action.
So, Joel, I know that an organization called Neighbors for Justice really supported your campaign. Tell me about them.
Yeah, Neighbors for Justice. I met Judy Johnson, who was one of the founders of Neighbors for Justice. She was very instrumental in my colleague, Anthony Petty, who was a young man, is a middle-aged guy such as myself, but was incarcerated since the age of 16. Did 30 years straight, 30 years straight. So Judy Johnson, Neighbors for Justice, was there for Anthony when he came home. And that means a lot to me. And so here we are in the wake of this nation going on a racial reckoning, looking at what went wrong in George Floyd and all the other people of color who were slain unjustly, and people want to get involved. And so here we have a group of people who want to get involved. They reached in and said, we see you as our neighbors, not as a single narrative, but as a neighbor, as a person. And so working with Neighbors for Justice, they were also part of the network system that I talked about. And there are so many people. I have to also acknowledge the Pivot Program, Georgetown University Pivot Program, led by the leadership of Mark Howard. And Mark Howard also was another remarkable person who allowed my voice to go beyond my four walls limitation, if you will. One thing I met with Mark would allow me to meet Kim Kardashian West. And I didn't meet the glam lady Kim Kardashian West. I didn't meet the billionaire Kim Kardashian West. I met the human being Kim, the homegirl, who came in the inside and said that she wanted to learn. So despite her status and all the remarkable things she's doing, like she came in vulnerable and humble and said, I want to learn. And so having the opportunity to meet these individuals allowed me to be able to get my voice out there. And frankly, what you all are doing for today, I'm very humble and thankful for you giving me your time, because I know that our time is our most valuable asset.
We're just so thankful that you've granted this interview to us. So thank you. So besides the support that you received on the outside, what was the support like on the inside, say from staff?
Yeah, I've been aggressive since I've been here. I don't like idle time. That's how you do the time. The time will do you. The old time is saying you do the time will do you.
Yes.
So what that looks like for me is that I'm active in everything that goes down. If it's an education program, sign me up. Sign me up. I'm in everything. So what happened was by me doing that, my colleagues on the inside, my comrades, the men and the women. Let me say, I'm going to answer your questions very too. A remarkable thing is happening here. We have co-ed classes. So you think of co-ed classes in the inside, like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Pinky going on, it's like bells start going off, right? But once again, with Georgetown University, taking classes with not only the males, but also the female incarcerated residents, which I said in my campaign that I want to make sure that I recognize the lives and the voices of the women, because I got an earful from the women. They feel unappreciated. They feel like their voices does not matter. They feel like they're not receiving the same fairness that their male counterparts are feeling. And so being in a class with these young ladies, or many of them like in their 20s, and I'm in my mid-40s, I'm looking at the opportunity that I missed with being with my own daughter. My daughter was, unfortunately, she was born when I was incarcerated. I haven't spent a single day with my daughter. I haven't spent a single day outside of prison with my grandchildren, her children. And so my heart goes out for the women. My queen taught me how to respect the dignity of a woman. And so in that class and participating with the school newspaper, a number of the programs on the inside, everyone knows my name. And one of the things that we have inside of DC DOC is a tablet system, an education system where they have a lot of programs on the tablet. And so that internal communication got the word out. And so I think that probably put me a little bit above some of my competitors in the race because I had so much content out there. But nonetheless, I'll say this again. I want to commend those men that ran. I wish it was some women that ran also. Hopefully next time it'll be some women that run also. And as I stated, I may be the first, but I would not be the last.
So you just mentioned that you had others that ran against you for other incarcerated people. What set your campaign apart from theirs?
As I stated, I think probably the content, right? I've been here for quite some time. I afforded me a lot of time here, and I haven't spent my time idle, as I already stated. I'm always active, engaging. I try to recognize humanity in all people. Part of my role is restoring the dignity of correction. I think that correctional people have got a bad rap. Sometimes we throw them on the bus too, but they're here trying to do a job just like we're trying to do a job. So I like to look at how can we work harmoniously together. How can we bridge that gap? Because the patient and the physician must be on the same page. They can't be at odds, right? And so we are the patients because we're the inside, and they're the physicians because they're working, coming from the outside. Then we have to have a harmonious relationship. And so doing that allowed me to meet so many people, and I think that may have gave me a competitive edge. But I can say this here. I was not even worried about whether I won or lost. I was already a winner when I seen how many other people cast the name in the ballots. That's why I ran. I wanted other people to exercise the power that comes with civic engagement. And that's what we need to do. We need to begin able to have civic engagement from the inside that can translate on the outside. If we can think like this on the inside, imagine the people will be once we transition to go home.
Absolutely. So that brings me to my next question. Last year in DC, lawmakers voted to allow people with felony records who are still in prison to vote. Right now, there are so many restrictive voting laws in so many states. I mean, other than DC, Vermont, and Maine, so many voting laws on the books that disenfranchise not only the incarcerated community, but the returning citizens. Is that sort of the line of work you believe you'll get into once you're released?
Absolutely, hands down. Because as I stated in the beginning of our interview here, if it wasn't for the work of my predecessors, I would not hold this office right now. Yes. And so what DC is doing, it has been the vanguard. If you look back in history, the nation's capital has been the vanguard of all the movements inside of the nation. And so I like to say what happens in this city sets a standard for the nation. So enfranchising the incarceration population is a vote for public safety. And so when we do that, again, if you have a person who was once a part of the problem, who was asking for an opportunity to be a part of the solution, give that person an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so what they're doing here, even before I was elected into his office, again, shout out to DC DOC, they gave us a seat at the table. And so giving me a seat at the table is saying, hey, let me hear from this guy who has 27 years of incarceration experience, who has been in 16 facilities, who has a proven track record, who has not succumbed to some of the ills that happens inside of the vices that happen inside of carceral spaces. I don't have any disciplinary reports. I have not been using drugs. Any of the things that I'm not down to those individuals who may have done so, but I'm only speaking about myself. I haven't done those things. And so now I'm the type of guy who you want at the table. And so we know now, even when we look at what's going on in our nation when it relates to ESG, and how now corporations can no longer make a file. The SEC, you know, I'm a financial geek, so forgive me with this. But the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, have now made a law that when you're filing your, when these companies are doing their quarterly reports, they want to know, what are you doing about ESG, environmental and social governance? How are you treating the social ills of the nation? They're being held accountable. And so they're saying that we want you to go on the record and doing some good to the community at large. That's what needs to happen in the inside also, and this is what DC is doing.
Throughout our conversation, Joel emphasized that his running for office was not just about him. He wanted to inspire others who were incarcerated, the youth on the inside and on the outside who felt and continue to feel hopeless. As we head to break, here's a clip on how Joel hopes to continue inspiring others.
I'm only an investor. That's it. I'm just an investor being used by God's grace. And so if I can inspire anyone to not allow their past to define their future, to not allow that weight of what happened or what may be going on present in their life to stop them from living out their full potential, then I've done my job.
More of our exclusive interview with the newly elected commissioner when we return.